All right. Hello, everyone. My name is John Leider, and today I want to talk to you about the next version of Vuetify, Vuetify 3. Let's go ahead and get started. Well, for anyone who doesn't know who I am, my name is John Leider again. I am the creator of Vuetify. Been working on it since 2016, and as of October 2017, it became my full-time job. So everyone's been asking, what is taking so long? Why is Vuetify 3 not here yet? And the simple answer is we want to get it right. There have been complications with COVID, amongst other things. However, for the most part, we are just really spending a lot of time to make sure that what we're creating is going to be expansive enough in the future so that we can address a lot of the community concerns faster than we are right now. Uh, so getting about what's actually done in version 3, a lot, actually. We've got most of our global services ported over with the same thing of mixins. Our mixins are kind of the core of the Vuetify 2 functionality, how we propagate it throughout. And for version 3, we have quite a bit of those foundational, those underlying bits of functionality that brings the different components to life, like elevation and sizing and transition animation, and making it so it's easier to implement these things into multiple components. So what we're going to show you, what I'm going to talk about today, what I'm going to show you is still in alpha. We recently, I think about a month ago or so, entered alpha for version 3, and we are progressing along pretty good. What we have we kind of intend to be that way. So the stuff that you're seeing today will probably be in the final version, but it may not be. So just letting you know. So one of the biggest things that I think made Vuetify successful was that we had kind of these overarching services, we call them plugins, whatever, that provided kind of intentional functionality for different things like theme or icons or language, and kind of pulled in these outer areas of an application in together, make it easier to work with. And the problem we ran into with that, though, is that everything was kind of based on this global Vuetify instance, which meant that we were kind of hamstrung to only having one instance of some of these either themes or layouts, for example. And one of the first things that we actually did was come up with a process for how we're going to provide and inject these varying services now, or global composables, into the various parts of the framework. And what this led to is some really exciting things, such as for theme. Currently in version 2, you are tied to a light theme or a dark theme. In version 3, light and dark are merely variants of a theme. You can have as many themes as you want. And we're also going to be doing some additional things with your theme properties, such as automatically generating the proper accessibility text color, giving you the ability to have multiple different themes nested within each other in an application. Speaking of application, we've got the layout system, which is one of my favorite features for the new version, simply because it is simple, but it's complex. And the first iteration of the layout system, which is known in version 2 as the application system, was very simple, but had a lot of foot guns associated with it. Users would often run into confusing circumstances where they didn't understand how to utilize different layout pieces together. And what we've done is we've actually homogenized the layout, and instead of it being tightly coupled within the layout components, it is its own implementation, its own set of components that has composable functions that power it, that we then hook in and use with components that we want to actually have access to this application layout. And what this actually does is it gives you the ability to nest multiple layouts within each other and have everything just work. Moving on to icons. This was actually a lot of fun. We got rid of all of the internal icon inference, all the computation that took place when we were trying to figure out which icon you were wanting and what to give you back. And what we did for version 3 is we changed how you interface and utilize icons. Now you've got a couple more ways of accessing the properties, but also it's considerably easier to work with multiple font libraries at once. And it's also going to be easier for us in the future to implement new types of icons beyond the default 4 that we have right now. And this has been a lot of fun moving through these different pieces of global functionality and kind of breaking down how they're going to make version 3 more flexible. You know, with multiple themes, you can have as many as you want. Like I said, you can enable as many as you want. You can also use providers, which are small little instance components that'll wrap parts of your application and can internally change the theme designation for all of the nested components. If you're familiar with Vuetify 2's light and dark system, where you can have a dark card inside of a light card, etc., it's kind of the same concept, except now we can apply that anywhere and it will work. Nested layouts, again, we want the users to be able to, we want to give them a good layout to start with. We want to give them options that kind of get their foot in the door. But the current system is just too proprietary. It's like 5 or 6 layout components. And if you want to hook into that yourself, it requires some internal knowledge of Vuetify architecture, and it's not very user-friendly. But abstracting this layout into this implementable piece of functionality, we now have, components that can hook in to a layout, but aren't expressly the only part of that layout. So in the future, if users, you want to create your own layout component and where it's located and how it's positioned in the DOM, you can easily do that now without having to mess with the Vuetify internals. Icon interface, again, like I said, is a little different. So we're dropping the as far as I'm aware of, the text using vtext and vhtml for icon support, and now we've moved to just an icon property. There's a couple different ways that you can interface with that. I've displayed 3 right here. The first one would be maybe how you would normally do it if you had a vicon component with MDI home inside of its slot. Second example is referencing a global default. So Vuetify has a language piece of functionality to it that we assign global values to. This is where things like data table or some of our accessibility tooltips, we have this default language that is translated in English and many others that gets referenced down to a single key. In this particular instance, we want to say, hey, give me the close icon that's used for current set of icons. And then you can also designate a specific set if you want. Now this is where it's cool. You could already set up multiple font libraries at the same time with Vuetify 2, but it wasn't very intuitive to use and there really wasn't a lot of information on it. Now we kind of had the flexibility to really not only save the user some typing if they need to, but also be a little bit more semantic in how they utilize various parts of the icon. So moving out of global composables, more hierarchical functionality, local composables are kind of like our mix-ins from version 2. They have a very specific job, whether that be to elevate, to change their size, to add borders. These kind of pieces of functionality are in their own right very simple, but combined together are what create ultimately the components that the user get to play around with. And as we've implemented these mix-ins over to composables, we've also moved in some additional functionality that was added to the material design spec, such as density the ability to change the height of components to varying levels without actually modifying the text size, something you've probably seen in various applications online or Google Gmail. And we really just try to take all of these different pieces that I would say are like properties on a sheet of paper. No matter what framework you're in, everyone probably has some concept of a piece of paper. And when you think about what a piece of paper can do, it kind of becomes a little bit more clear about how the different pieces of functionality can be used. A piece of paper could be flat, or it could be elevated. An elevation with a light, would give it a shadow. A piece of paper can have an determinate height or width. It could have a disabled state. It could have multiple. It could have rounded corners. So all these different pieces are kind of like properties. Like what can you do to a piece of paper? And we take these smaller implementations again and build them up to create the components that we have now. So with version 3, really, once we've moved those mixins over to Composables, it has been very easy to continuously increase our development speed. As we put down more pieces of foundation, we have more functionality to grab to as we implement some of the existing functionality. For all intents and purposes, even though we have bug reports for a lot of components, they are still very solid and feature rich. So as we continue to update them, we want to make sure that it's in a way where we can not only address the concerns that the users are having with some of the bugs, but also make it easier for us to maintain. And as we put in these components, right now I've got a list up there of some of the more notable ones, and there are some more in and more coming, but we only have so many of them documented. So make sure you keep an eye on the alpha documentation. But all of these different components are meant to be, at least in this particular instance, very basic. You've got avatar, badge, button. These are really kind of basic components. They typically don't go inside of each other. So an avatar doesn't typically have another component that goes inside of it. So it's kind of like this very base level component. And then divider, footer, icon, sheet. And these are the kind of core components that we put together that form the foundation of everything else. Everything gets bigger in Vuetify. We take the smallest pieces and then we continually add onto them, kind of like layers of a cake. Some of the other big changes that we've made, and if you've worked with Vuetify 2 in a production environment, you may have encountered something like this, or if you worked in version 1.5, the framework has, when we added the ability to easily tree shape components to maximize performance, we had to set up some options which could potentially change the ordering of compiled styles and cause side effects, different from when you're developing or in production. So we've kind of went back to the table and reassessed and looked how we were not only creating these styles, but how we were, simplifying commonly used functionality, getting rid of unnecessary important declarations. There will always be kind of use cases that are revolved around important. We kind of have a love-hate relationship with it. And in some cases it is needed, but for the most part, a lot of the previous implementations, they can be removed and they're no longer required due to how we're actually coding now. We've expanded the variables that you can change to modify the different internals of a component. And these properties as well often reference CSS properties, which is a really, really awesome part of version 3 that is going to enable us to add even more runtime, the ability to change even more features or themes or functionality at runtime with passing over some of this information as opposed to all of it being hard coded. And again, with the style conflicts, everything is being readdressed to make sure that we're coding the components in a way that if they are expected to be usable by themselves. I'm not going to say that we've completely gotten rid of VApp yet, but we are close and we are working towards it. So the idea here is complete abstraction from each other. And while we've been going through and updating all of the styles, we've taken an opportunity to implement some of the updates that have occurred in the material design specification since the last time we visited it. One of those namely being density, which is really fun. Density with our different size options really gives you the flexibility to make almost any or meet any type of design requirement. And also, it has given us an opportunity to kind of look at how we implement this styling on our components. You know, styling has been one of the biggest or largest complaints since the beginning of the framework. And even though we have improved it over time, I still think that it is not in a place that is representative of the quality that our team can put out. And so we kind of sat down and thought about what we wanted to be the hallmark part of version 3. And kind of what came out of that was, you know, what makes a framework different from another? Well, we do have functionality differences. You may have, Vuetify may have a button that contains some pieces of functionality, and another framework has another button that contains some of that functionality and maybe more or not some. But for the most part, when users are moving through frameworks to choose, it often mostly has to do with style. Does it match their styling, or can they easily style it? And is it maintained? Because typically, most components, at least I think in Vuetify, are just as feature rich as an entire library that's available on GitHub. Right? Maybe there's a specific Vue multi-select component that is very feature rich, that is very specific in its implementation. But the Vuetify autocomplete is, pretty much on par. It's pretty much on point. So if you liked our autocomplete, but didn't like the design style, it was really kind of, even if you did get into the documentation of it, it was still very often to figure out how to implement this. And that's why we ended up coming up with the idea of our global defaults. So Vuetify 3 is going to be the very first fully featured Whitelabel UI library. If you take the style and the design off of a component, and component in whatever sense, it could be just in general HTML using something like Bootstrap. It could be, or the code you use when you're working with Vue, Vuetify, and templates and whatnot. But all of these components have a massive amount of functionality behind them, a massive amount of customization options behind them. And if you take out the design aspect, it's almost like it's an even playing field, because people are looking for what has the most functionality, which has the most support. Not, does this fit our design, or can we modify it to our design? So in version 3, you will have the ability to set the default property values for every single component in the framework. You'll also be able to modify more global changes, such as no ripples, all inputs are compact, something that is very overarching. And these different pieces, which end up allowing us to further modify the design, it kind of turns material into, again, it's like a layer over the top. It exists because it is our default implementation style, but majority of the functionality that is tied to material design in terms of what a component would actually do is kind of the same thing in a lot of other frameworks, even if they don't have the material design specification. So what we're trying to do is say, hey, you can configure an entire application, design your own, take your own design system and set it on top of Vuetify. And then instead of worrying about how to style your application, or can I style my application, or do I need to create a base component that is used throughout my application because I'm reusing buttons so many times, or do I just type button and give it, the flat property 30 times on my application? We really just kind of want to smooth that out for users and let them get set up and ready to develop. So I'm really excited for y'all to get to play around with this. You can actually touch it in our alpha, which I'm sure everyone's asking, well, how do I try it out? Well, we have our Vue CLI plugin is set up to not only install the default Vue 2 installation, but we also have options for our version 3 preview. So if you have Vue CLI installed, you can type in Vue create my app or whatever your application is, and create a new Vue application as you normally would. But instead of creating a Vue 2, you would create a Vue 3 application. And then the same process ensues. You Vue add Vuetify, and then you end up being able to select an option of the version 3 preview. Now, we have, probably should have gone back, right? Someone's probably didn't get to see that. And they're going to be like, what did he say? So there's more information on our docs, right? So if you create my app, and then you can go to that application, that Vue 3 application, and just instantiate Vue add Vuetify, and it'll get you going. If you want some additional information on that, we do have our alpha docs that are currently live. They're at next.vuetifyjs.com. And if you go right there, we've got an installation page that'll get you up and running with all the available ways to test the newest version. We also have our progress board up on GitHub, which you can find at titan.vuetifyjs.com. This is where you can kind of find what we're working on, what's coming up, what's next. There are some things in there I need to get an update, but so far we have been making very good progress through our phase 1 of development. And if you're messing around with the alpha, or you want to just talk with the team about it, we have our community Discord server, so you can stop by there, community.vuetifyjs.com. And kind of while you're on the new documentation, you'll see we have some new examples for the different components. We have we're testing out some different concepts of having inline editing and TypeScript examples to improve on what I think is already a really good documentation experience for the current version. And for those who aren't aware, in about 6 months or so, we really overhauled everything about the documentation to make it easier to contribute. So one of the things that we're definitely looking for, if you're ever interested, is people that would like to contribute to the documentation, because it's all in Markdown now. So if you're interested in kind of getting into Vuetify 3 or Vue 3 and you're not very proficient like me, then it could be a way for you to provide feedback and contribute to the next version of Vuetify. All right, so what's next? All right, so I'm sure everyone wants to know what we're working on and what's coming up. Well, right now, we're currently in alpha phase 1. We have a few more features to finish, namely with implementing our layout system into things like navigation drawer and bottom nav. And once those are complete here in the next week or so, we'll be finalizing what, again, I call phase 1 of development. We have 4 phases. Each is meant to build on the last, with the first being kind of the foundation. We talked about this a lot today, the core of what makes the framework what it is. And each phase is designed to build on top of that. So a good example would be, we have a text field, and the text field has an icon in it, it has an avatar in it, it has messages in it or a label. All of these parts could and mostly are their own component. So before we get to these higher complex, higher order components, we need to make sure this baseline's good. So that's what phase 1 is, and we're feeling really good about that. Phase 2. So phase 2 is going to start this month, and it is going to be, I guess, kind of like, I call it the niche components. They're not within a subset like all form components or loading components, but they cover kind of a wider range of things, from carousels and parallax and whatnot, and kind of giving us an opportunity to really put into testing a lot of the functionality we did in phase 1, and not really dive into something as complex as what we have in phase 3, which is majority, if not all, of the input components and form functionality within the framework. So moving into phase 3, our focus will be on form inputs and controls and expanding that process out. Really excited to show some of the new ideas that the team has for working with forms, making it a lot easier and more intuitive. And then when we come to phase 4, which is in July, this is a big boy. This is a heavy one because for all intents and purposes, most people use about a third of the components in the framework. Some people use more, some people use less, but mostly they use a third. And of that third of people, excuse me, of that third of people, we don't want, you're not going to need every single component in Vuetify. So we might be in late beta, but you don't use calendar, you don't use data tables, you don't use date time picker, stuff like that. And even though we don't suggest to use alpha beta software in production, my intent, my goal is that when these pieces come out in each phase, they're almost, in what I would consider a ready state, because the breaking up of components really just has to do with the size and how they're consumed. You don't use calendar, but we still have to make it to get to version 3. So basically what that means is most of you who are very eager to get into development of version 3, once we hit beta, which will probably be after phase 3, so June area, majority of what I would say people in the framework use will be there. People will be able to start experimenting with upgrade processes and how to work with their application with the new version. Now, even though it's not next, it just recently happened, very recently. Even though we're developing version 3, we still have a high priority on maintaining version 2 and ensure that we have a steady flow of bug fixes and some new quality of life features coming into the framework for users that we're not ready for version 3, or maybe they're not ready for version 3. So 2.4 is one of our most recent minors. It included some new features like category grouping for calendars, updated slots for text fields and carousels, and kind of a myriad of different bug fixes to, again, advance the framework forward on that version. Now, everything we do still has feature parity with version 3. We're backporting something from version 3 to version 2.4 if it makes sense, or we're porting something from version 2 up to version 3. And if that doesn't make sense, then we're probably going to implement it a different way. But we just like making sure that we're staying committed to the development, and everything in version 2 that we're developing on and advancing will still be covered in long-term support once version 3 actually releases. Now, one of the things that is coming up on the horizon is our version 2.5. So that is going to launch into beta this month. In the same sense as version 2.4, it has some new features. We're bringing in a new component, the one-time password component, and which is really awesome. The developer who's contributing it has put a massive amount of time into it, and so much so that he impressed Kale, and Kale worked with me to make sure that we could continue the development of version 2 to implement a component like this, along with better animation performance with progress components, and some additional properties for text fields with placeholders and quite a bit more. We're looking to release it in early May. So we're going to have a very short beta for you all to take a look at. We want to make sure that we have a couple changes that we want to make sure do not cause any non-backwards compatible changes. But other than that, you should expect to see the beta this month and a full release of version 2.5 next month. So the big thing everyone wants to know, V3 release. Now, before I say this, I will put out the point. We have had, in some cases, we've slipped from quarter 1 to quarter 3 with our version 3 release schedule. And I just want everyone to know that that is not without precedent, that, not always are we able to push forward in areas that we'd like, and sometimes circumstances just put us behind. But I've worked with the team very extensively on this, and we are very comfortable with coming out still in quarter 3 with a targeted date or targeted month of October 2021. Now, this date is going to come with a lot of things, including all of our tooling will be upgraded day 1. We'll have lots of new tooling for people to use. And it's going to be basically out the gate, everything that you have available in version 2 will be available in version 3. And we're really excited to one, have some of you test it out for yourself and on your computer, but also to continue to bring you more information in the future. So with that being said, I'd like to thank all of our sponsors. We have definitely grown in support over the years, and myself and the team are just deeply grateful for the support that they have given us that allow us to continue making these products. And if you want to sponsor Vuetify too, you can go to sponsor.vuetifyjs.com and help make the dream stay real, right? And that's it. Thank you very much for checking out this presentation. I'm really excited in the coming months to show you some additional things that we've been working on with the new components and functionality and features. And you know, again, thank you for listening to this presentation, and hope you enjoy the rest of the online VueConf. If you want to, please follow me on Twitter at @0skills, Vuetify.js at Vuetify.js, and then we also have our main Vuetifyjs.com website and our community Discord. So again, my name is John Leider, and that has been Vuetify 3. Thank you very much.